I'm so excited about today's topic. We're going to be speaking about different perspectives on time, what is time, how time is related to God, and why that matters to our lives. And I want to welcome Dr. Ryan Mullins. Welcome, Ryan.
Thank you. Thank you.
Ryan has authored a number of books. One of them being called The End of a Timeless God. I've also read your article on the Divine Watchmaker, which I think might be becoming a book as well soon. So, Ryan, it seems that you have a real interest in time, in God, and God's relationship with time. Why does that matter to ordinary believers? What does it have to do with our lives?
Yeah, so this is a question that bothered me when I was much younger, because time is this it's this like all pervasive thing. Like, we are temporal beings, and every conscious moment of our existence, we are experiencing the passage of time. We are experiencing things passing and ceasing to be. We're experiencing things coming to be. And so I'm like, okay, well, what is this all pervasive thing that's always around me, that's dominating my life? Like, what is this stuff that is time? And so St. Augustine asked that question. He's like, well, what is time? And he's like, well, I know exactly what it is until someone asks me. Then I don't know anymore.
Mm,
And I'm like, okay. So it's like this very familiar stranger. Like, it seems like you know what it is because it's all around you all the time, but you just can't seem to really get a good cognitive grasp on it. Like,
yes.
really get a handle on what exactly is this. And that really bothered me. And so that's why I was started doing philosophy of time. And then when I started looking at philosophy of time, it turns out, well, they're not really interested in that question either.
Mm,
And then I started asking some physicists, and they weren't interested in that question either. They're like, we don't know. We don't have a clue. And I'm like, no, this is not acceptable. I need to know this. So, because I was like, this thing that's all pervasive force that's in
mm,
your experience, in your daily life, every single moment of your existence. What
mm,
is that?
yes.
And so I just felt like I needed to know. And then when I think about God, I'm like, well, okay, so God's supposed to be like solely responsible for the existence of absolutely everything other than himself. And I'm like, okay, well, time, is he responsible for the existence of time? What would that mean? What does that look like? He's the Lord of time. He's governing over history. It seems like all this time stuff keeps popping up, and he's supposed to give me everlasting life, a life that has no end in time.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Well, it's okay. It seems like this is a major biblical theme. What
Yeah.
is it? What's going on? So those are the things that kind of grabbed me and grabbed my
Yes.
attention, that made me go, this seems like this matters to our faith.
Yes. I love the title of your book, The End of a Timeless God. That obviously kind of pricks the attention of many of the philosophers of theology, which often begin with a conception of timelessness, eternity being timeless, that kind of starting assumptions. But as you say, our experience day by day is an experience in which things continually move, continually flows, continually change. And when we actually start thinking about what do we mean by timeless, um, it's actually much more difficult to nail that down, or we can do it theoretically, but it's to give an example, we travel a lot, speak to different groups, and I hear the word timeless popping up often. People have a mystical experience, and they would say it is timeless. It was like time stopped existing. But when I prompt it a bit further, and I say, "What do you mean by that? Was it?" Did all movement stop? No, no, there was movement. Did all relationships stop? No, no, there was this beautiful relationship. And so
Mm-hmm.
I think the popular use within Christian communities of the word timeless is more something that resembles an experience that is not your normal experience of time. It's a very different experience of time, but technically that's not timeless. If there's still
Right.
movement, if there's still any kind of thought progression, any experience, any awareness that progresses, that would still be time.
Mm-hmm.
Would you agree?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I do. I think what's going on is a lot of theologians have done a disservice to the church by throwing around terms like timelessness and not defining them. And
Yeah.
so that's why I was at such pains to really dig deep into the tradition in the into the timeless God and go, here's the definition, here's what we've meant to get clear on this. And so what it means is you're an eternal being if you exist without beginning and without end,
Mhm.
but you are a timeless being if you exist without succession or change. So you don't do one thing and then another. You don't have a before and an after. And
Yes.
then you don't have temporal location. So you don't exist now.
Mm.
And then you don't have temporal extension, which means like you don't persist. You don't go from one moment to the next to the next.
Yes. Yes.
And so then when we talk about these like, religious experiences, well, you could easily be like, so that religious experience you had a beginning, and then a
Mm.
bunch of stuff happened in the middle,
Yes.
and then it ended. And so you're like, that's didn't do a very good job of being timeless, did you? Because it had this succession, it has this change, it has all this stuff happening,
Yeah.
and you don't have that with timelessness.
Absolutely. And so that's a very good distinction between eternity and timelessness. There's a way for us to understand eternity without having to immediately think of timelessness. And
Mhm.
so again, that brings it down to, I think, the very focus of the scriptures and the very essence of our experience of relationship with God is something that happens within time. It's dynamic. It's a movement, a relational movement. Um, and consequently, if we think of relationship with God, relationship is a movement.
Mhm.
And so, interestingly, many of the, those who approach scripture from a specific philosophical point of view, not only defines God as timeless, but also from God's point of view, they say there's no real relationship, that we kind of experience relationship, but actually it's God just kind of being patronizing. Because from his point of view, there's no experience of
Mhm.
relationship. That is kind of just descending to the level of ignorant little kiddies and giving them an experience that's not real, because we experience God, but God does not have a succession of experience from us from that perspective. But I think the scripture has got quite a different perspective on on God's
Mhm.
experience of time. Yeah. I
Yes,
want,
it does. And what's interesting is the classical tradition admits that too. Like they're
mm,
really clear that they actually have this question they ask repeatedly, which is why does God describe himself in the exact opposite way of what he is? Why does he describe himself in temporal terms? Why does
yes.
he describe himself as having empathy when we know he doesn't have empathy? Why does he describe himself as, and you on and you go. So
Yeah.
yeah, this is a very, very standard question in theology historically.
And maybe we need to adjust what we know to the way God actually revealed himself. I think that's a
Might
nice.
be nice. I don't know. It depends if you're interested in that sort of thing, I guess.
So, one of the most important events in which God reveals himself, Exodus 3. For the first time, Moses experiences God as YHVH. God reveals his name, and the base letters that is used within that name in the scripture just before then, where it says, "Who are you?" We've translated it, "I am that I am." And again, some that's the translation, and then some have interpreted that idea of "I am that I am" as this timeless existence, this God that has no temporal experience. He just is existence itself. But I've heard you offer an alternative interpretation of that text, and would love to hear that again.
Yeah, so let me just open the passage here. And then before I say that, let me say something about this. So when you're looking at proof texts for divine timelessness,
Mm.
it's really odd game you're playing because every single passage that you would use for a proof text for timelessness
Yeah.
explicitly describes God in temporal terms.
Yes.
And this is because all the biblical terms for eternity are temporal terms.
Mm-hmm.
So the biblical scholar George Ladd, he puts this very succinctly. He says, biblically speaking, eternity just is unending time. So you don't see timelessness in the Bible at all. And so anybody appealing to like Exodus 3:14 or any other passage is a bit weird, because you're like, well, those are temporal descriptions. Why would that get me to a timeless God? So let's look at this passage here. So you have, what you've got is this Moses in the burning bush. He's looking at the burning bush, and God's saying, Moses, I want you to go do this whole Exodus thing. Go talk to the people of Israel and tell them I'm going to free them from captivity. And Moses is like, I don't know if I want to do this. Like, it's kind of uncomfortable. Mm-hmm. And God's like, no, do this. And Moses is like, all right, okay. Well, if I'm going to do this, who am I going to say sent me? Who am I going to tell by? Whose authority? Give me a name here. And God says, well, okay, well, go tell them. My name is I am who I am. Say to this people of Israel, I am has sent me to you. And what a lot of Old Testament scholars will point out, that what they'll say is this passage is not really I am. It's better translated as I will be who I will be. Hmm. And so you see this like in Walter Brueggemann and Terence Fretheim and so many others. They'll say I will be who I will be. Mm-hmm. And here's the idea. You want to know who I am? You want to know like what kind of God I am? Take a look about what I'm about to do. Yeah. That's who I am. Yeah. You're like, oh, okay. And so what Henri Blocher points out is, look, this is a God with a future. Okay, that doesn't sound like a timeless God. Mm. And then when you carry on in the very next verse, so after he says, say I am sent me to you, God also said to Moses, say this to the people of Israel, the Lord, the God of your fathers, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob has sent me to you. This is my name forever. Thus I am to be remembered throughout all generations. Go and gather all the elders of Israel together and say to them, the Lord, the God of your fathers, the God of Abraham, of Isaac, and of Jacob has appeared to me, saying, I have observed you and what you've gone through, and I've been with you in Egypt. And I promise that I will bring you out of the affliction of the Egypts. So like what you've got twice here, God says, my name is, I'm the Lord of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Yes. That is a God with a history, with a past. You want to know who I am? Look what I did in the past. I was with your fathers then. You want to know who I am? I'm going to be who I will be. Look and see what I'm about to do in the future. So a God with a past, a present, and a future, it's not a timeless God. That's a temporal God.
Much more relevant to the way we live. A God
Yes.
that's actually involved in our history, a God that's involved in our future, and the God that's moved by what he sees. I love that. Mm-hmm. I saw what's happening here, and that's why I'm talking to you, Moses. In partnership with you, I want to change some of these things. Now, I guess that brings up some other philosophical and theological aspects that I find very exciting. If change, and maybe let me first of all give just my understanding of what time is, and please feel free to correct, disagree, whatever. So if we really boil down to what time is, I think the simplest definition would be change. Anything that moves, anything that changes. Now, in many of the philosophical and books I've read, they often limit change to the physical. But I want to maybe throw into that metaphysical change. So a thought, a flow of consciousness, there's a change in that. And so maybe time as some kind of dimensional material by itself, maybe that doesn't exist. Maybe time is just an abstraction, a way in which we describe the changing relationships that we experience. And I think that would even be in line with the scientific ideas, even, Einstein trying to work out how this relativity and speed and all of these relate to one another. It's the relationship that is then called time. Would that be a similar view from your point of view?
No. So this is called the relational theory of time. I think it encounters a very serious problem that's actually been known since the time of Aristotle. And so here's the claim, is that what time is the more fundamental thing is there are events. And so events describe or that's a relationship between events is what time is. So time is just simply a relationship between events.
Yes.
And so because events changing,
Yes.
that's what creates a before and after. And so you're like, oh, cool. Sounds like, okay, I got time coming into the story. But here's the problem is, so when you ask people what an event is, they start sneaking in time into the definition of an event. And you're like, now the relational theory says events are the fundamental features of the world.
Mm-hmm.
Events explain where time comes from.
Mm-hmm.
And so you're like, okay, now what is an event? And like, well, an event is like a when something happens. It's something happening at a time. And you're like,
Mm-hmm.
you're supposed to tell me where time comes from, and you've already presupposed time in there. It's a circular sort of thing. That's not okay. So what I prefer what's called the absolute theory of time,
Yes.
which is time is this like eternal uncaused substance
Yes.
that has several different roles. It is responsible for how change is possible. It's the thing that makes change possible.
Mm-hmm.
It's the thing that's the source of moments of time or events. And it's the thing that unifies a series of moments into what you might call like a timeline.
Yeah.
So it makes like a coherent like story, like a particular like story of the world. And I want to go one step further and say that, well, God is that. Like that's like time is an aspect of God.
Yes.
So time is the eternal uncaused substance,
Yes.
is the thing that makes change possible. It's the thing that, unifies a series of moments. And you can see people like Isaac Newton in the Western tradition affirm this view, and then in like Eastern philosophy, you can find people like Raghunath Shiramani affirming this view. So I'm taking a slightly more radical view, but it's making time an aspect of God. So you've really got God, explaining the entire temporal reality we see, which is part of its nature.
So if I'm just thinking out loud here with you. So
Mm-hmm.
if I had to address that perceived inadequacy with how the event is described, if I can describe an event as just this continual flow of relational movements, I don't have to refer to a time or another dimension or another substance besides the movement and the flow of relationship. But that is maybe what you're thinking in terms of absolute time as well. I'm not sure. My understanding of relationship is this continual movement in which relationships dynamically change. And it is the change that then gives birth to time. But, hey, maybe you can think of that relationship as, in another aspect, the Trinity, the idea that God, in essence, is a relational movement and is therefore the source of what we would call time or change. Do you want to comment on that, or?
There are various people who do try to make this move. What I'm doing is I'm saying time is actually more fundamental than that, because time is supposed to be the thing that explains how change is even possible. And so how can you have, because change, like, okay, so a moment of time is the way things are, but could be subsequently otherwise. And so when you get the next moment, you have a change or whatever. Well, what's going on? Well, things are different. They're different than the way they were before. So change takes place over a series of moments. And so you need something that actually explains what's the thing that unifies that change. What's the thing that underlies that? What makes those moments possible? Okay, and so that's where I want to be like, time is doing all that. There's a
relationship between possibility and actuality as well.
Yes, all of this. And so I want to say time is the thing doing all of that. And if I make time an aspect of God, like part of God's nature, then I'm like, well, God's the thing that explains all of this. He's explaining what's actual, what's possible. He's the very ground of all relationships. He's the ground of all like your experiences. And so, so you got this really deep, nice, tight picture of how God and time like are interacting together. So it's a.
I want to prompt you, because at the moment I am, convinced of this relational view of time. So I saw in your Divine Watchmaker book another idea that God is the possibility of time. I love that word, because possibility is one of those words that totally resonate with me when I think of God. It's possibility. Um, but then, the objection that you mentioned in terms of those who speak about relationship always have to refer back to time. In my own thinking, I don't do that. I just see the movement of relationship. And I see that movement of relationship within the divine essence as well. However we think about Trinity, I think it's just another way of saying God is relational movement. Why is it necessary for God to produce something else called time if that relational movement itself is time?
So in my view, God's not producing time, like God just is time. So what I would be claiming is that God or time itself is what's more fundamental, and that's what's explaining or producing the changes, the movements, the relationships.
Yes.
You couldn't have that without time.
Yes.
And so the time, which I want to say is just like a divine attribute, like that's what's more fundamental. So that's an essential fundamental feature of reality.
Yeah.
And that's what explains all the phenomena. So all the things I want to talk about, if I want to say, well, there's movement, and we're like, well, how do you get that? Well, there's all this changes, all these relationships. Well, what makes that possible? And I'm like, God does,
Yes.
time does. So it's really making God and time the fundamental thing in reality.
Okay.
Yeah. And then I think if I just described the world in terms of change and movement and relations, that still wouldn't capture all of what you might call like the temporal landscape. There's like a few other things I want to capture, like something when I talk about history, when I talk about the future, when I talk about what's happening now.
Yes.
When did something happen? When did God do that? When did, what were you doing the other day?
Yes.
Those are all like temporal phenomena that I need to capture. And if I just describe things in terms of events and movements, well, I haven't captured the when did that happen question. And I need an answer to that, because if I want to talk about, well, when did Christ suffer on the cross?
Yeah.
These are all temporal questions that I need answers to. And so I need more, there's more phenomena to capture that I don't think I could capture simply in terms of relationships and movement.
So this might be interesting to you or not, because I'm just kind of observing what's happening in my mind as you're talking.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking, so I can absolutely agree with that idea that time is an attribute of God. And I agree with it because I think I can say relationship is an attribute of God. And then...
Yeah, if you believe in the Trinity, yeah.
Yeah. And so again, for me, the relational movements and time becomes equated as an attribute of God. Then I'm thinking about how do I describe when? And again, I can think of any when as a specific configuration of relationships that in every movement, every moment by moment, the whole universe has got a configuration of relationships. And even if I think of before, if there was a before, if it's not a continual, inflation and deflation of universes, if there was a time where God was without creation, I can think of that even as timeful, because I can think of God having a succession of thoughts, having a stream of consciousness, some form of consciousness. So those are just things that that I'm thinking of, that I try to work out as I read the Divine Watchmaker, which I found inspiring and beautiful, by the way. But that's the part that I was saying, I need to talk a bit further and think a bit further. Yeah.
Oh, yeah, me too. I don't know.
Let me take that further then, in the context of I will be who I will be, a God who's actually involved in time, the source of time. But I think the beautiful aspect that this brings out is a God who has, in a sense, unfulfilled potentialities, a God who um, has possibilities of being, possibilities of experience, possibilities of action that is unfulfilled. Now, obviously, for some philosophical schools, that's unacceptable because the idea of perfection is that all possibilities must be fulfilled already. But again, I know you'd probably agree with that. Just like beauty is something actual, that, you know, certain events, certain forms come together and something beautiful occurs. I can see an amazing sunset, but that, no matter how beautiful a sunset is, it never captures all that beauty is. Tomorrow there's another beautiful sunset. And I think the same thing can be said about perfection. Perfection is not a state that you arrive at. It is the best that is possible in this moment. You know, that is perfection, and there might be greater perfections. And so the idea that I want to throw out here, what makes this relationship between us and God so incredibly beautiful, if God is involved in time, is that he can participate in my experience, that he is truly affected by my experience. And this makes this relationship so much more real than a distant God just observing things happening. How would you see God's unfulfilled potential and time interacting?
I see it in a similar way to you. So when I think about God existing prior to the universe,
Mm-hmm.
it seems to me that God has an like an infinite range of possibilities. Like what
Yeah,
things could he do?
yeah,
And well, you can't do all of those things because they don't all work together. You can't do them all at the same time.
yeah,
Well, if God's got free will, he could be like, okay, I want to come up with a plan of how I want these things to unfold
yes,
and how I want them to go. And so I, bring about the next moment and the next moment.
yeah,
And from there, he starts unpacking his plan. And part of his plan seems to me, is to engage in some kind of meaningful relationship with free creatures.
yeah,
What exactly are they going to do? Maybe God knows, maybe he doesn't. Maybe he's got a really good guess about what they're going to do. There's a couple ways you could go on that. But what you have is a really genuine interaction,
yeah,
an interaction that takes place from moment to moment, which is how relationships actually evolve.
yeah.
If you really want to enter into a meaningful relationship with someone, it doesn't happen all at once. You
Mm-hmm.
have to like slowly come to get to know them more and more. That's what you see in the Bible. God coming to know his revealed more and more to his creatures, and they're coming into a
Yes,
deeper understanding of him. And it's what you experience in your own daily prayer life. It's what you
yeah,
experience in your own relationships with others. And so I want to say, yeah, the same thing's going on there with God.
yeah, yeah,
So him having lots of potential to do lots of things, I want to say that's just part of what it means to be omnipotent and part of what it means to be free.
yeah,
Omnipotence, omnipotency, you've got the potential to perform, the maximal
yeah.
range of actions.
Mm-hmm.
And if you're free, you could do that or that. You've got options. And so I
Mm.
want to say this is part of what it means to be free. And then God's like, hey, I want to give some of that freedom to you. I want you to have freedom as well, so we can have a genuine, loving relationship.
Yeah, yeah.
I think it just makes sense of our spiritual
It
practice. I
does.
think it just makes sense of
It
what we read
does,
in the
and
Bible.
suddenly you can see your own existence as part of one of those potentialities in God that was unfulfilled before your existence. And
Mm-hmm.
here you are, the whole idea of the word becoming flesh, that the potentialities within the logic and the mind of God finds actuality in us, and that, you know, incarnation in that sense doesn't just refer to one event 2000 years ago when Jesus appeared, but rather that Jesus unveiled a process that is still ongoing.
Mm-hmm.
And he might be the culmination, or he might be the crescendo of that process up until that stage, but he unveils that all of creation is this movement from the potentialities in the mind of God to the extent that we participate with God, it becomes actual in your life, in your existence. I'm trying to also continue on that theme of I am, because that reminds me of John 8, where Jesus says, before Abraham was, I am. Have you got any insights on that?
Yeah, so there's a bunch of passages like this where Jesus affirms his pre-existence.
Yeah.
And like that's kind of it's kind of wild if you're thinking like this is just some human guy, because the idea that he like pre-existed like Abraham, you're like, well, Abraham, like that was hundreds and hundreds of years ago. You can,
Yeah.
no, you can't be. And we're like, well, then he says this I am statement. So you're like, oh, you're kind of equating yourself with God. That's naughty. That sounds kind of radical. Well, it is a radical statement. You do have Jesus saying like, yeah, I'm divine. What do you want? Like before all this stuff was, I was. And then he even like prays to the Father, saying, God and Father, I want like all these people to have their loving relationship that we had before all of this happened. Yeah. And so it's like, ooh, okay. So this is Jesus putting himself in a divine status, which is radical and it's pretty astounding. It's amazing.
Yeah, beautiful. I saw in one of your, I think it's on your website, but you did some lectures at the Notre Dame and those things. So I wanted to throw out a cheeky little question, and that is, when are you going to help David Bentley Hart to understand the philosophical approaches to time a bit better? I would love to see a debate between the two of you. Because he's very much, eternal changelessness views. I love a lot that he says. I'm sure you do as well.
Yeah.
But that's the one part that I just can't figure out why he's still stuck in that kind of philosophy on time.
I don't know. He has a very high view of tradition that I no longer have. I want to say I have a high view of tradition in the sense of these are men and women who are thinking very hard about the faith, and I want to take that seriously, but I don't take them to be like these infallible sources.
Yeah.
I'm not certain he takes them to be infallible sources, because he picks and chooses which people he wants to agree with, but at times it seems like that's what's doing the driving work, and it's not really the scripture. It's not different experiences we have. It's not looking at some certain kinds of philosophical arguments, but he's looking at different kinds of philosophical arguments that he thinks should move you to affirm, say, like universal salvation or something. But when it comes to time stuff, I guess I'll say this. Philosophy time is really, really hard. It's very specialized knowledge. And so when I see lots of theologians and even other philosophers not get it right, I'm just like, well, it's to be expected, because this is a really hard topic. So, if I could convince David Bentley Hart of divine temporality, that would be an amazing day. I don't foresee that happening, though.
Well, one can hope. So,
sure.
Thank you so much, Ryan, for your time. So appreciate it. I love these themes. Part of what we do on our podcasts is we bring together philosophers and scientists. We also had Professor John Hort on a while ago, speaking about his understanding of time. And I think beautifully what he brings out is the narrative and the story that develops over time, that time is this opportunity for meaning to accumulate. I think what you said in terms of relationship, that this is what makes relationship beautiful. You can still surprise me. The meaning can still be added. So thank you so much for your insights, and I would highly recommend that people get your book and listen to some of your other videos. Thank you.
Thank you for having me.